We are joined by my colleague Ari Melber. Ari, it is another example of the Democrats sort of laying these bricks in order. These are now the first-hand witnesses, taking away, depriving Republicans of what seemed to be their talking point last Wednesday and Friday, that as compelling as the witnesses may have been, as non-political as they clearly and obviously are, they weren't first-hand witnesses. These two witnesses today were.
Both witnesses are first-hand, and Vindman struck me as the most devastating we've seen in a public hearing to date. This is someone who obviously looks the part, is the part. You'll notice there was a real reticence by Republicans to go directly at him, which departs from maybe some of the smearing that had gone on among their media allies. And most importantly, this is an Army officer who spoke very directly about why he phoned it in. He saw a bribery plot. He knew that it was political and wrong. He phoned it in through private channels, and he went about his work. This is not someone who reads in any way as aggrandizing, as looking for the spotlight. He said under oath, and it struck me as a very credible piece of testimony, that he phoned it in because he thought it was wrong, and he went on with his work and his duty through official channels. He did not think that he would be testifying before the cameras or the American public. And in our experience, I do think the public responds strongly to that because there's really very little to impugn. This is his story. It's devastating for the White House.
I've been wanting to ask you this question as I sat listening to Colonel Vindman talk about going through his chain of command. He doesn't just follow the chain of command. He reveres the chain of command. It is, to me, what distinguishes him from everyone else we've heard from. And in his view, following the chain of command, when he had concerns, meant going to the White House counsel's office. He mentioned John Eisenberg. Yep. He is the person in the White House counsel's office who feels to me like he's emerging as almost a Don McGahn-like figure. He's the Ukraine scandal's Don McGahn. His motives and his moral compass are opaque to all of us, but he is the person who's in receipt of the most information, it would appear, about where norms and laws were strained or maybe broken.
It's a great point you make, and viewers will remember Don McGahn ultimately was the star witness in the Mueller report. He was cited by Bob Mueller's investigators more than anyone else, precisely because, as you say, he was in the red-hot center of what's allowed, of the president pushing him and ultimately standing up. And we see that same pattern here.
Yeah.
Different plot, but same pattern.
New scandal.
Right. Season 2.
Exactly.
But in all seriousness, different plotting.
Right.
But career people. Many of them who say, look, I've done this for other presidents. Right. Of course I've had disagreements. This idea that, people at state, according to some of the critics we heard on the committee today, they were just airing policy differences. No, actually, these are people who've worked with different policies and under different presidents by definition. But as you say, many went to the lawyers through the official channels because they saw something that looked wrong, quote, inappropriate, potentially illegal. And that goes to something else here, which is ultimately, this is not about leaking. It's not about criticism. It's not about anyone breaking the rules. The whistleblower went privately through the secure channels and wrote down the concern. The people who, as you say, called the National Security Council lawyers and other White House lawyers also through the proper channels. So it's more devastating when, having done that, the rules, the law we have in this country is credible whistleblower complaints, as everyone's heard now, go to the Congress. And here's the Congress doing its oversight investigative work. In that way, you see the system working, and that's a bulwark, implicit and explicit, against the alleged bribery plot, which is trying to kneecap the system, get the career people out of the way, get the nonpartisan people out of the way, get the Colonel Vindmans of the world out of the way, so Rudy Giuliani can cut a deal.
Do his thing.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.